Hello everyone, welcome back to Dakota's Political Circle, and today I wanted to do another tier list for you guys. So I'm just going to do these at random when I just think about, adding a tier list when things are getting kind of boring. And today I actually wanted to do one on the 2028 primary candidates. And actually, this specific video isn't me saying, there's going to be two separate videos for this, but specifically this video is like my opinion on who I would support the most compared to the least. Who would have my most support out of all of these candidates from like S tier to F tier. That's basically how I'm going to do it. But then my next video I make will actually be like my, comprehensive list of who I think will be the best option for the Republican Party and who could be the worst. And so there'll be two separate videos. So this one will be about my like personal opinion on who I think would be the best option that I would enjoy, like that I would personally enjoy. And then the next video will actually be about like what the majority of the Republican Party would expect, like the majority of the Republican Party would it would be good for them basically. But yeah, I'm going to do this list right now. Let me show you all the options. These are all the options down here. I added a couple extra because they weren't included, just to add them, because they are possible candidates for 2028. You never know. I added Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. I know RFK Jr. is an independent, but you never know if he's going to switch parties or not. And if he did switch parties, he probably would be a higher ticket than usual if he was a Republican. And then there's Kash Patel. The reason I put Kash Patel is because I think he's going to be a really, really great person in the Trump organization, and a lot of people are going to support him. That's the reason I think he might try an actual presidential run, or maybe at least a Senate run or something. And then I also added Mike Johnson. I'm not a big fan of Mike Johnson, but I wanted to add him anyway, just because Mike Johnson is, he is a bigger figure in the Republican Party as of right now. He is the leader of the House of Representatives, so it makes sense. And then I also added Laura Trump. The reason I added Laura is because Don Jr. is here, and Laura is a prominent member of the Republican Party as well. That's why I kind of wanted to include her. The reason why I didn't include, like Ivanka or any of other Trump relatives, mainly because Ivanka is not really focused on politics. If she was, I'd say she'd be higher on the list, but that's why I'm not including her. And then, Barron's too young, obviously. Obviously, Laura Trump's husband, Eric. He could be involved, but I just don't think he'd be as massive a hit as his wife. So that's why I didn't include him. But let's get into it. Let's start right now. And just to remember, guys, this is my personal opinion on who I would support on everyone on this list, not, me thinking who's the best for the Republican Party specifically. That's the big reason. That's the big thing here. I just want to make that clear because some people might see these picks and be like, why wouldn't you choose them? Well, that's more or less my personal opinion. But let's start here. So the start of it is Brian Kemp. Now, Brian Kemp, in my opinion, is like a massive rhino. I think Brian Kemp is a big rhino of the Republican Party, and the only reason we keep him around is because he's electable. He's electable. That's the reason we keep him around. He's electable for Georgia, a state that probably wouldn't vote for, a Republican senator unless it was Brian Kemp. And this is for presidency. And honestly, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't put Brian Kemp that high because I don't think he'd get much done. I think he'd be more like a rhino. He'd be more of like a Mike Pence, a Mitt Romney sort. So in my personal opinion, I put Brian Kemp at the F tier. I know some people could probably say D because he is electable and stuff, but I don't know. I just don't think he'd really get much done. He'd be really crappy as a president. So I really wouldn't enjoy Brian Kemp. And then we have Byron Donalds. So Byron Donalds is really interesting because you know a lot about him, but you also don't know too much about him. But he is a growing figure in the Republican Party, and I think he'd be a pretty good president if he was president. I think he'd push Trump's agenda. Well, even though Trump isn't around anymore, he'd still push the MAGA agenda, is what I should have said. I think Byron Donalds would be a solid, president. But I would say personally, I'd probably put him in like a high B because you don't know too much about Byron Donalds. You don't know too much about him. So I'd say like a high B. He is really respectable though. You got the stupid Chris Christie here. You got Chris Christie. I don't know, Chris Christie, he's really bad, like really bad. He's very rhino, honestly worse than Brian Kemp. So I'd say Chris Christie is like even below F. And honestly, Chris Christie's probably going to run for president as a Republican, just like he did last time, because he's stupid. But Chris Christie is probably going to run, and he is going to be at the bottom of the barrel compared to all others. Also, before I go to my next one, I just want to say, if you see that banner at the bottom, the reason I have that there is because there's a bunch of ads that keep popping up. I did that in my last tier list video, so I'm just going to keep that there, just because, I don't want ads to get in the way of the video. Okay, the next one, Chris Sununu. So I don't know too much about Chris Sununu, so I'm just going to put him in this column. I'm not too well known on Chris Sununu. Like, I know his name, but I don't really know him too well. I mean, I've heard good and really bad things about him as well, so I'm just going to put him in here because I'm not too known on Chris Sununu. I know almost all of these people, but for some reason there's maybe one or two that I really don't know too well. So I just put Chris Sununu here because I'm really not too well known on him. Now, Donald Trump, I have to put him here because he's not going to be eligible. Now, there could be a workaround in some aspect. He could try to work around to become president. If he did, I'd probably put him in S tier. But obviously, I'm just going to put him here because most likely he's not going to be eligible. So I'm just going to put him right here. I'll put him in front of Chris Sununu because Trump's just not eligible. It's not because he's, I don't know him. But I'll just put him right there. So let's go to the next one here. We've got Don Jr. So Don Jr. is a really interesting one. In my personal opinion, though, I think Don Jr. is more of a radical person than his dad is. I know some people would disagree. Some people really like Don Jr. Like, I'm a fan of Don Jr. Like, I have his book and everything like that. But I think it would be very hard for him to win the presidential election because he is way more divisive than his dad is. He has a lot more, pushback than his dad, which for a Republican candidate, that sounds awesome. But at the same time, if you want him to actually get elected, that's a really, really hard thing to do. Unless you're facing someone like, Pete Buttigieg, or you're facing Kamala Harris again, Newsom. Like, you're really not gonna have if it's someone besides that, then you need someone that's a little bit less divisive. But I'd say he's a solid candidate. Like, I wouldn't put him in S tier, but I'd put him at, A tier. I wouldn't put him at S. The only reason being is because of the divisiveness and his, a little bit of his controversies. Now, I wouldn't say he's not electable at all, but I'd say that, he's really, really high up there. It's just, he just really has to work on his rhetoric and stuff like that. But I put him high A tier. That's where I'd put him. Then you got Doug Burgum. Now, Doug Burgum's interesting. I think he'd be a solid president. I think he'd be really solid. It's more or less about his age because he is getting a little bit older. But at the same time, I think Doug Burgum would be a solid choice. I don't think he'd be an incredible president or anything like that. But I think he'd be a solid president. He'd get stuff done. But I'd probably put him at a high B tier in front of Byron Donalds. That's probably where I'd put him. I wouldn't put him at A because I don't think he's going to be an amazing president if he was. But I would say, he would get elected, unlike Don Jr. would be a little bit complicated. But I'd say Doug Burgum could easily get elected. It's just more about his policy. So I'd probably put him at a high B tier. And then you got Elise Stefanik. So not a lot of people know about Elise Stefanik. Surprisingly, I do. But she's not as well known, just kind of like Byron Donalds. But she's even less well known on policy than Byron Donalds. So I'd probably say with Elise Stefanik, I'd probably put her in, probably a low C tier. And the reason being is because she's not too well known. She's even less well known than Byron Donalds. Obviously, we're going to find more. We're going to find out more about her in the coming years because she will be the UN ambassador. So we'll find out some stuff about her. Hopefully, she doesn't turn into a Nikki Haley. But we'll see about that. But I'll say low C tier. And then this guy, I actually don't know this guy. I've actually heard his name a lot, but I'm not sure who he is. It's Francis X. Suarez, but I'm just going to put him in the who, I don't really know him category who. So I know his name. I've heard his name before, but I really don't know too much about him, so I'm just going to put him there. Then you got Glenn Youngkin. So Glenn Youngkin's an interesting one because I wouldn't label him as a rhino. He's not a rhino. I wouldn't really label him as a rhino. But I do think he is not as hardcore as, Trump is. But I do think he'd push really good narratives no transgender bathrooms and, a lot of education links. He's going to have, a lot of education links, I think. I think that's a big part of Glenn Youngkin. He's really big on education. But I'd probably put him maybe in B tier. I'd probably put him in front of Doug Burgum, possibly, because Glenn Youngkin is really liked. So I'd probably put him right in front of Doug Burgum there at B tier. And then we have Greg Abbott. So I know some people like Greg Abbott, but I completely despise Greg Abbott. And the big reason is because so many people think he's like a hardcore Republican and think he's like really, really conservative. And he does push for the wall. Like, he's good at that. But then there's other things about him that I don't like. I don't know. I'm very mixed on Greg Abbott, and him being an actual president, I really don't like that. But I mean, there's good aspects of Greg Abbott. Like, I'm not gonna hate on everything. Like, there's good aspects on him. Like, there's good things about him. I just think there's other things that are just not good. So I'd probably say with Greg Abbott, I'd probably put him in D tier. I really just don't like Greg Abbott at all. So me personally, I'm just going to put him in D tier. I wouldn't say he'd be like a rhino, but I still wouldn't think he'd do like great things. Like, I'd probably say like he'd be better than Bush, like W. Bush, but I really don't think he'd be, astronomically better. Now going to the next one, I got J.D. Vance. Now J.D. Vance is a front runner for, the Republican 28 primary. In my personal opinion, J.D. Vance has been solid. He's been great. Now, there is like a tiny bit of stuff that you could say like in his past that he said like against Trump and stuff. But at the same time, J.D. Vance since then has been a really, really great contributor in the Republican Party. And he's really been a really great person. He's been very, very likable. He's really has, some Trump-esque policies. And I see him as a great like president if he became a president. Now, would he be better than Trump? I probably don't think he'd be better than Trump, but I do think he'd be like someone that would push the MAGA agenda, keep Trump's executive orders in place so stuff gets done. Like, he'd be a good continuation, is what I would say. I think he'd be a really good continuation of the MAGA agenda. So I'd say J.D. Vance would be a solid choice. I really like J.D. Vance a lot, so I'd say S tier, top of S tier. Well, I wouldn't say top of S tier, but you'll see who else I put. Remember, this is my personal opinion. This isn't based on who I think the Republican Party should choose based on base. This is more my personal opinion on who I would actually like to be, the president. But J.D. Vance is up there, absolutely. He's an S tier. Then you got Joe Lombardo. I do know of him a little bit, but I'm not too well known on his policies. Too well. I'd say he's probably a little bit too old anyway to be president, but I'd probably put him in just, the WHO category. I would put a not eligible category, but it doesn't allow me, so I'm just going to keep it right there. So then there's John James. So I do like John James. I just, I don't think he's someone that should be president. I mean, I think he'd be, a good candidate. I think he'd be more of the level of, like Tim Scott. I think he'd be more like a Tim Scott Republican in that aspect. Maybe a little bit better. But I don't think John James is going to be a great president. I think it'd be like a middle ground MAGA. But I mean, I would just say, for John James, I'd probably put him above Elise Stefanik. Put him right there on C tier. So that's where I put John James. And then you got Josh Hawley. So Josh Hawley is very solid. I think Josh Hawley is a solid candidate. But I don't know. I think he has a solid, he's very solid. It's just more about him speaking out and stuff. I don't think a lot of Americans would, contribute with him. And in my personal opinion, I really like Josh Hawley. I just don't know if he'd, get a lot around to actually win an election. And in my personal opinion, I'd probably put him at, probably a low B tier. Because I like Josh Hawley. I like Josh Hawley a lot. I just don't like him that much. Maybe in front of Byron Donalds, because I know more about Josh Hawley than Byron Donalds. Because Josh Hawley is more well known in the Republican Party so far. Then you got Katie Britt. I know some people like Katie Britt, but I think she's a flip-flopper. And I also think that she is like a McConnell advocate. Like, she, squeals to McConnell behind the scenes. And I don't really trust her that much. I think she can be MAGA, but at the same time, I really don't trust her. But I wouldn't call her a rhino either. I'd say Katie Britt is like a D tier, probably below Abbott, because I do have trust issues with Katie Britt. So I'd probably say low D tier for her. You got Kim Reynolds. Now, I do know Kim Reynolds of Iowa. I think that's Kim Reynolds of Iowa, if I'm correct. I don't know. I'm not too big on her of like being an actual um, candidate for president, and I don't really like too many of her policies and stuff like that. I'd probably say like an F tier in front of like Chris Christie, maybe. I really don't like Kim Reynolds that much. You got Kristi Noem. I have a mixed bag with Kristi Noem. She's good on policy, but at the same time, during the COVID pandemic, she wasn't that great. She was a flip flopper. I don't know. Kristi Noem is a weird one here. I think she could be good, but at the same time, as a president, I really don't know. I definitely would not put her in C or above. So I'd probably say with someone with past controversies and not someone that's that likable, I'd probably say, probably in front of Katie Britt, because I kind of don't like Katie Britt. So I'd probably put her right behind Greg Abbott just because of her past stances on stuff. You got Liz Cheney here. Oh, this is going to be interesting. I absolutely hate Liz Cheney. Hate Liz Cheney so much. She used to be MAGA. It's interesting. Well, based on her policy, she was very MAGA. She was very MAGA back in the day. But over the years, she's became very, very resistant of Trump, anti-Trump now, and basically everything like that. I see her more of like as a candidate maybe for the Democrat Party now, maybe like a more right-wing Dem, instead of her being an actual conservative now. I'd probably say for Liz Cheney, F tier. I'm not. It's really hard to say if she's better than Chris Christie or not, because I hate Chris Christie so much. I'd say based on policy, just put her above Chris Christie, but not above Kim Reynolds. I just really don't like Liz Cheney. You got Marco Rubio. So I don't like Marco Rubio as a presidential candidate. I mean, he's ran for president in the past, and I remember back in 2016 when he ran for president. I really did not like him whatsoever during that campaign. He's got better over the years, but he's still not been that great, at least on a presidential campaign standpoint. I don't know. I really don't like Marco Rubio when it comes to that. I think he's a good Secretary of State. He's done a great job at that. I think he was a decent senator, but I wouldn't say Marco Rubio should be a president. But I would not put him at an F tier. I think he'd be better than Brian Kemp. So I'd put him, in front of Katie Britt. Oh, actually, in front of, now I'd put him in front of Greg Abbott, Kristi Noem, and Katie Britt, but I put him in a high D tier. That's where I'd put him. Majority Taylor Greene. I know a lot of people won't like this opinion because a lot of people from MAGA do like Majority. It's very hard to say her name. MTG. Let me just say MTG. MTG. I really do not like her at all. She's very liked in the the MAGA wing. It's just she's very dislikable. Like the way she is, she instead of her showing her MAGA agenda through speaking and being a very happy, energetic person, actually showing support for MAGA. Instead, she's more of the attacking kind. She's very attackful, but at the same time, when she attacks, she seems kind of stupid the way she does it. For example, if you guys remember when she was yelling at Biden with a MAGA hat after his speech. I think it was after the State of the Union speech when Biden was president. She was, yelling at him. Biden, looked at her weird, and then she just, basically looked dumb. MTG is just, I really don't like her. I mean, she's great on policy, amazing on policy. She's a loyalist. I love that. Would she win an election? Absolutely not. She would get crushed by any Dem opponent you put up. If you put up Gavin Newsom, I guarantee you, MTG would lose. If you put up someone like AOC, I still think MTG would lose. She's just very, very unlikable, and I just don't see her, being a president. And I think she's good on policy and stuff like that. So I would not put her with the rhinos, but I would put her in front of Greg Abbott. So I'd say right behind Marco Rubio. Just mainly because of her policy, but because of her likeliness is very bad. She's not a very likable person because of how kind of flamboyant she is. So I'd say right behind Marco Rubio, but in front of these three. So now to the next one here. Now, Matt Gaetz, I do like Matt Gaetz a lot. I think Matt Gaetz is a really solid person. Like, he's very great on issues, but kind of like Majority Taylor Greene, it's more of how he presents himself. But at the same time, I like Matt Gaetz way more than MTG. So I would say with Matt Gaetz, I know he's very controversial. That's the only bad thing about him. I think it would be hard for him to win an election, but I do think he'd have a better job at it than MTG would, because Matt Gaetz is smarter with the way he debates. When it comes to MTG, she's kind of crap. So I would say when it comes to Matt Gaetz, I like Matt Gaetz a lot, but at the same time, I mean, I would put him above Marco Rubio. I would, probably put him above John James and Lee Stefanik, but I would not put him in B tier. The main reason being is because Matt Gaetz it's just the way he presents himself, and it's very hard to like. And I really do like Matt Gaetz. I think he's an awesome guy. I just don't see him as a president. Now what's funny is I do like Matt Gaetz more than Byron Donalds, but I still think Byron Donalds would be a better president than Matt Gaetz would. I think Matt Gaetz would be a little odd as a president. That's why I kind of put him a little bit lower. And then you got Mike Lee. Now, I don't know too much about Mike Lee, so I'm actually going to put him in the who category. I really don't know too much about him. Now, Mike Pence. Now, Mike Pence is someone, I mean, it's funny. This is actually kind of funny because I remember, everyone loved Mike Pence. Everyone was so happy Mike Pence got chosen as Trump's VP. And then he stabbed Trump in the back, and now he's the exact opposite of liked. When Trump actually picked him as VP a long time ago, I was actually very, very against it. I actually wanted him to pick either Ted Cruz or Newt Gingrich as his VP. I wanted one of those two to be his VP. I really didn't like Mike Pence. I thought he was shady. I thought he was a really bad person. I thought he was going to stab Trump in the back, and honestly, I was right, which is interesting. I was like, well, Mike Pence looks like I thought Mike Pence was kind of like one of those loyalists that would listen to you, at least not until the very end. And I thought he was a rhino at heart, which unexpectedly he was. So I was right about that. But my personal opinion, him as a presidential candidate, I think he would be kind of crap. I think he'd be more like a George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush maybe. So I'd probably put him in an F tier. I'd put him probably right behind Kim Reynolds. I mean, I don't like Kim Reynolds that much, so I'd probably put him right behind Kim Reynolds. He's above Liz Cheney and Chris Christie, though. But Brian Kemp is leading that F tier, though. Then you got Mike Pompeo. I used to like Mike Pompeo. Then over the years, he's gotten kind of weird with his politics. He kind of seems like an anti-Trump rhetoric in a way nowadays. So, and I know a lot of people push him out as like a military person and stuff like that. It's just, I like, military candidates. I think that's awesome. But at the same time, I don't think Mike Pompeo should be president. So I'd say F tier, but I'd put him probably in front of Kim Reynolds. Right there. Kim gets first place in F tier. Then you got Nikki Haley. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to like this. So I don't like Nikki Haley, but I also like Nikki Haley. Like, I like Nikki Haley a little bit, but not like a lot. Like, I despise her on certain issues, and I also despise her incompetence against Trump. But then she also acts like a Trump loyalist when she wants to get a spot. So she's very odd. I wouldn't say she's a rhino, but I do think she's kind of rhino. Now, is she better than Kemp? It's very hard to say. That's a very hard thing to say, but I do think she could be better than, a Katie Britt, a Kristi Noem. Now, I really don't. I like some of Nikki Haley's policy, but I don't like her on several other issues. But I do think she would be an okay president, I guess, but she would not be good as Trump. So I would say for Nikki Haley, and also I think she would easily win an election as well, but I would say for Nikki Haley, I would put Nikki Haley at about probably right in front of Greg Abbott, because MTG really has good policy. Nikki Haley is not as much as MTG, but she is more likable than MTG. I just think MTG has a bigger advantage than her, but I do think Marco has a bigger advantage than both of them because he's more of a loyalist than Nikki Haley was. And then Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is interesting because I really liked Ron DeSantis a lot. I wouldn't say Ron DeSantis is a rhino. A lot of people bring up that Ron DeSantis is a rhino, and I don't think Ron DeSantis is a rhino at all. I really don't believe that whatsoever. But I do think he is very bad at debating, and he'd be a very odd president because I think, he pushes his agenda out really well. I just would worry about his negotiations with, other world leaders. Trump's a really good negotiator. But when you debate, you got to actually be able to debate. You shouldn't be able to back off. And when you're a president, you should be able to have that debate knowledge transfer to negotiation. And especially if you're a businessman as well, like Trump was. And that's why Trump can negotiate really well. When it comes to Ron DeSantis, I feel like he'd kind of screw up. But I do think he'd be, at least a decent president. So I would say Ron DeSantis, maybe high C tier, maybe. I think that's where I'd put Ron DeSantis right there. Probably a high C tier, right in front of Matt Gaetz. Because Matt Gaetz is a little bit more controversial, so I'd say high C tier. Then you got Sarah Huckabee. I do like Sarah Huckabee a lot, but I don't think she's really solid as a presidential candidate. She's a likable person in the Republican Party. But I don't see her as a great candidate for like like a president. So I'd say, I'd probably say Sarah Huckabee can be like right behind Marco in D tier. That's where I put Sarah Huckabee. Well, actually, okay, that's a little bit hard. I mean, Marco is, well, yeah, I'll put her right there. I don't think she's as knowledgeable to be a president as Marco is, so I'd put her right there. I think she's more of a loyalist to Marco, but I think Marco would be a better president than Sarah Huckabee would. Then you got Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz in 2016, I used to really, really not like Ted Cruz. I thought he was like a rhino, a massive rhino. He's changed over the years. He's developed his actual policy. He's done really, really great. I don't think he's really moving along with the MAGA agenda just because he's moving along with it. I think he actually believes it, and he's actually supporting it. And I think he's gotten better, a lot better than 2016, based on his, opinions and everything like that. I think he'd be a solid candidate for president. I think he'd be a solid president. I don't think he'd be, like, massively incredible, but I think he'd be a solid president. So I'd say with Ted Cruz, and also I do like Ted Cruz. I have his book. He's an awesome dude. But I'd say Ted Cruz would be I'd probably put him in an A tier. I'd probably put him right behind Don Jr. I do like Ted Cruz a lot, especially now. He's gotten way, way better with stuff. But I would not put him in an S or above Don Jr. But I do think he'd follow through with, pushing MAGA forward. I'm really not sure what he'd really push. I think he'd more or less push tax cuts and closing the border. I'm not sure too much else he would do. I'm not sure if he'd negotiate trade deals and stuff like that aggressively. But I do think he'd be a solid president. So let's say Tim Scott. So Tim Scott's a great guy, very likable. But I don't think he'd fit too well as a presidential candidate. But I don't think he'd be, bad. I think he has a good agenda and stuff like that. I don't think there's anything horrible about him. He's a very good MAGA guy. I'd probably put him at C tier, probably right in front of John James. That's where I'd put him. Right behind Matt Gaetz, because I kind of like Matt Gaetz a little bit more. Tim Scott doesn't have as much charisma as I would like. I wish he had a little bit more charisma, but I do really like him. Then you got Tom Cotton. I like Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton's a cool guy. I think he's really great. Also, I'm actually going to include one more person at the end here. Actually, I won't. Well, yeah, I think I'll be able to add it during the video. If I can't, then I'll just cut it and then cut back and let you guys know. But I'll get closer to the end and then add another guy because there is one more guy I kind of wanted to add because he is really likable. So okay, let's do Tom Scott. Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton. I think Tom Cotton is a solid choice. I think he'd be an okay president, but I don't think he's like too up there for me. I'd probably put him right in front of Greg Abbott. Well, yeah, right in front of Greg Abbott. I think Nikki Haley's a little bit better. I know he has better policy. I just don't think he's as likable. You got Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson's an interesting one here. So Tucker Carlson is an awesome MAGA guy. I think he has the charisma. He has the speech. I think he'd get trade deals done. I think he'd do a really, really great job. But I don't think he'd be up there with Vance. I think he'd be more of a I'd put him in front of Ted Cruz. That's where I'd put Tucker Carlson. I think he'd be really awesome. I think he'd have like the charisma like Trump, the pushing advantage of Trump, a lot of stuff aligned with Trump. I think he'd be a very solid choice. Now, I don't think he could beat Don Jr., but I do think he could be up there quite literally. Now, Vivek. Now, Vivek's basically like Vance, but I think ever since he left Doge, he's been getting a little bit of scrutiny. But in my personal opinion, I'd probably put him in A tier. I think he's like a very solid person. I wouldn't put him above Don Jr. I wouldn't put him above Tucker either. I'd probably put him right in front of Ted Cruz. That's where I put him right there. I think he does a really good job. But I don't think he's as, great as Tucker or Don Jr. Now, if he does do a governor run, maybe he gets better. I'm really not sure, but we'll see. Will Hurd, I don't really know too much about it, so I'm just going to put him here. Now it goes to these ones. I'm actually going to pause the video for a second, and then I'm going to see if I can add one more person to this list, and then I will, go from there. If I can't, then I'll just, just go with these guys next. Okay, so I was able to add another person. So I actually wanted to add Rand Paul because he has ran for president in the past. Now, I'm not going to go specifically about him first. I'll go with the next ones first. But I just wanted to add him because I was kind of thinking about it while I was doing the video because I kind of forgot to add him. I forgot to add him. Okay, let's go with the next one now. Now, Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I know several people in this video are gonna hate me for this, but I love Tulsi Gabbard. I've been a staunch supporter of Tulsi Gabbard for many years. Like, I've been a supporter of her since she ran for president in 2020. I was a big supporter of her, even though she was on the Dem side. Now, there is some things that I know she was a little bit different with me on when she was running in 2020, when she ran in 2020, for example. I know she's supported more of an abortion standpoint than I ever would. And that's the only thing I really didn't like about her, but everything else was really awesome. Like, she's a military person. That's exactly what I want in a president. She could be an amazing negotiator. She's a woman, even though being a woman isn't a category. It's just awesome to see someone that is a woman that actually can have that actual advantage. I think she'd be an incredible president. I think she'd push great motives. I think she'd push motives in education that hasn't been pushed too much for the Republicans. She could push more into military spending. I know she wants to get out of war. She's very anti-war. That would also be a great thing. I think she'd do great with trade deals. Now, I know a lot of people are going to hate me for this because of her past Democrat standpoints, but I do think she's pushed over a new leaf. But I would put her above Vance. I know many people are going to hate me for this because people love Vance and are a little bit iffy on Tulsi Gabbard. But for me personally, this is about me personally. Like, I'm a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard, and if it was between Tulsi Gabbard and Vance, I would be voting for Tulsi Gabbard. Now, the majority of the Republican Party probably would vote for Vance, but in my personal opinion, I would go with Tulsi Gabbard. But obviously if Vance ran for president and actually won the nomination, I'd vote for Vance. No matter what, it's just going to happen. But Tulsi Gabbard, I would definitely very, very much support her to the very end. If she did make it to the very end. If she didn't really make it to the very end, obviously, I would go with Vance most likely. But going to the next pick here, RFK Jr. Now, RFK Jr. is high up there for me. I know he has some issues with abortion and stuff like that, and he still has issues with that, by the way. But I do think with other issues, like with health, I think he's really great on. I think he's really great with a lot of other issues. I think he's a great candidate for president. I mean, obviously, he's a Kennedy. If a Kennedy ran for president as a Republican, that would get a lot of news out there. I think he'd be a solid president. I mean, I know he'd be really, really old, though. That's the only bad thing about him. He'd be really, really old as president. But I do think he'd be a good president as a Republican. I think he'd push more to, a lot of more stuff within the country than outside the country. But I do think he'd be, solid on trade deals and stuff like that. I think he'd push a lot on education. More or less, he'd be helping more of the working class. He'd be helping more of the poor. I think he'd do a really, really great job, and I think he'd be a really solid president. Now, do I think he'd be in an S tier? I don't think so, mainly because of certain issues he has, and he still has. So I'd probably put him, like right behind Tucker, mainly because of some of the issues RFK Jr. does have. Kash Patel, if he does work out the way I think he does, I think he's going to be a really, really great candidate for president if he actually does end up running for president. But it really depends on how well he actually does and if he's very, very, very likable. So far, he looks like a likable guy. I think he'd be a good president. I think he'd really push down the deep state and be very, very solid. But my personal opinion, I'd probably put Kash Patel somewhere, probably right behind Glenn Youngkin. And the only reason being is because we don't know too much about Kash Patel yet. I know some things about Kash Patel, and I think they're very, very solid. But at the same time, I'm not sure if he's good enough to pass up some of these people like Glenn Youngkin and Ted Cruz and stuff. But I do think he can pass up Doug Burgum, Josh Hawley, and Byron Donalds because he's been very, very solid on what he's been speaking out on. He's been very, very anti-federal government. I think he could be a very solid candidate if he ran for president. And he's also very outspoken. Now, when it comes to this guy right here, Mike Johnson, I know a lot of people have a little bit of decisive opinions on him. In my personal opinion, I don't like Mike Johnson. I think he's kind of like a closeted rhino. The only reason I wanted to include him is because he's a prominent member of the Republican Party because he is the House Speaker. But I did want to bring him up. I do think, Mike Johnson would sound good and he would, try to push the MAGA agenda, but I think he's more of like a closeted rhino. So I'd say Mike Johnson would kind of be, I'd probably put him in front of Kim Reynolds, but he would not pass Mike Pompeo or Brian Kemp. I just don't see him as a good candidate. And then you have these two left. I have Laura Trump here. The main reason I put her is because, Don Jr. is here. I'm just curious. Now it's kind of interesting because I really like Laura Trump. I think Laura Trump's a very, very good figure. I think she could even be better than Don Jr. But at the same time, she's not she is a Trump, but a Trump by marriage. But I do think she's a solid person. I think she'd be a solid candidate. I think she would absolutely push the MAGA agenda. I don't think she would shy away from it. I think she's a great person, and I think she would be an amazing president. Now, would I put her at S tier? Probably not. But I would put her I'd probably put her in front of Don Jr., mainly because, in my personal opinion, I think Don Jr. is a little bit too divisive. But I do think Laura Trump would be a very, very solid person. I think Laura would be really, really great, and I would definitely think about supporting her, but at the same time, I wouldn't, that wouldn't be my main choice. But if she, was the front runner, absolutely, I would support her. And then you have the last one here. I know some people have differing views on Rand Paul, but my personal opinion, I really like Rand Paul. I see him as a libertarian Republican. That's kind of what I call him. He's a libertarian in like a Republican's clothes, but also, some people don't like that. Me personally, I love that. I think Rand Paul's an awesome person. I really like how he is. I think he'd be an awesome president. Like, I personally think Rand Paul would be a really cool president. Like, he would push a lot of things. I definitely think he would be pro-Second Amendment. He'd be a lot less pro-government. He'd definitely be cutting a lot of federal spending. I think he'd be a solid president. He would be very liked among the populace. And I would personally really like him. So I wouldn't put him at S tier, though. I would definitely not put him at S tier. But I would put him... I'd probably put him at... it's Rand Paul. I wouldn't say he has, MAGA qualities. But I would say, right behind... that's a little bit hard because Don Jr. is kind of divisive. I'd put him right behind Don Jr. That's where I'd put him. I put him really high A tier. Right behind Don Jr. That's how I feel where he'd fit on my list. But yeah, guys, this is my list right here. All of them are done. I couldn't really think of any more. These are the only ones I didn't really know too much about, except, obviously, Donald Trump. He's just not eligible based on this list. But I just wanted to say I really don't know too much about these guys, so I really didn't want to include them yet. But based on the list, anything below C, I probably would be worried about voting for. Anything C and up are the people I would probably end up voting for. C would be a little bit of a mixture, other than probably down here, like when it comes to John James and Elise Stefanik, I'd be a little bit iffy because I really don't know too much about him. Tim Scott and up, I would definitely probably vote for the Republican unless, the Democrats actually find a good candidate. But the only way I would vote for a Dem, I guess you could say, is probably if it's Tim Scott and below. That's the only way I would think about voting for a Dem. And the only reason being is depending on who the Dems put up. Like, for example, if the Dems put up, someone like, everyone's been pushing around like Stephen A. Smith as a joke, but if Stephen A. Smith actually was the candidate for president and the Dems actually thought about it and made him the nominee, I'd say it might be a possibility depending on his policies that I probably would vote for him based on, John James and down. But if it's, like Tim Scott and up, I would absolutely vote for the Republican no matter what. Because there's not really too many people that the Dems can put up that I really like that they're actually considering. So that's kind of my opinion. But absolutely, Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance are my top two choices. I know some people disagree with that because a lot of people like J.D. Vance and Don Jr. and probably put Tulsi Gabbard pretty low on their list. But my personal opinion, based on my politics, based on how I feel about certain people, that's kind of how I feel about it. Now, I know a lot of other people feel differently, and I completely understand that because obviously, I have differing views than a lot of other people. I'd probably consider myself center-right, and I know a lot of MAGA Republicans consider themselves pretty far-right. So, but I'm also considered a MAGA Republican as well because I support a lot of MAGA issues, but at the same time, there is little minimum ones that I don't support that I'm pretty far left on. So it's a little bit of a weird issue with me, but I do like Tulsi Gabbard a lot. I think Tulsi Gabbard would be an incredible president. I think she'd be the best female president this country would ever have in existence. And J.D. Vance would be an amazing president as well. And then, going through A, just to tell you guys, I think Laura Trump would be a great president. I think Don Jr. would be a good president, but divisive. I think Rand Paul would be a great president as well. Tucker would be pretty cool. I think he'd be like a Trump, basically. I think RFK Jr. would be solid, but he'd have some issues, Vivek would be solid. I think Ted Cruz could be solid. But then when you get down here, they're a little bit more iffy, but I think some of them are more solid than others. But yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed my list. Let me know in the comments how you feel about it. I know a lot of people are definitely going to disagree with Tulsi Gabbard, though. But I do still want to have your opinion in the comments because I'm really, really curious about how you feel about my list and stuff like that. Obviously, this video is probably I probably posted it at a certain point that a little bit stuff was kind of down in videos and stuff, so I probably just posted it to post it. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comments how you feel about this video, and I will, catch you guys in the next one. All right, bye, guys.